In the heart of a small Georgia town, a single cup of coffee poured for a veteran set off a chain reaction no one could predict. Ellie Harper, a waitress with a heart bigger than her paycheck, risked everything for a man and his loyal service dog. What happened next didn't just shake a diner, it rocked a community, stunned a nation, and redefined what courage means. This story of defiance, redemption, and quiet heroism will grip you to the core. If you've ever stood up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe to HeroHush Stories, and share your own tale of bravery in the comments. Ready for a journey that'll leave you breathless? Let's dive into a moment that changed everything. Cedar Grove, Georgia, was the kind of town where time seemed to pause. Oak-lined streets glowed golden in the morning sun, American flags snapped gently on porches, and the local hardware store still boasted a faded sign from the 1980s. Nestled on the edge of downtown, just 20 minutes from the iron gates of Fort Ramsey, a sprawling Marine base that pulsed with discipline, the Willow Brew Cafe was a beacon of warmth. Ellie Harper, 34, was its heart and soul. With her dark hair pinned loosely, her apron speckled with coffee stains, and a smile that disarmed even the gruffest strangers, Ellie didn't just run a diner, she crafted a sanctuary. The cafe wasn't about gourmet brews or Instagram-worthy foam art. It was about strong, no-nonsense coffee, bottomless refills, and a chalkboard cluttered with handwritten notes. Tom skips cream, Iraq flashbacks, Sarah likes her eggs sunny side, misses her squad. Ellie remembered everything, names, birthdays, the dates veterans avoided mentioning. Her own story stayed tucked away, but the town knew it by heart. Her younger brother, Lance Corporal David Harper, never made it back from Kandahar 7 years ago. His photo hung above the counter, not in uniform, but in faded jeans, laughing with a mug in hand, taken weeks before his final deployment. That loss fueled Ellie's quiet mission, to make every soul who walked through her door feel human again. But on one crisp Tuesday morning, that mission would face its greatest test. Could one small act unravel her entire world? Every Tuesday at 6 a.m., Ellie hosted Veterans Haven, a sacred hour that had grown from a whim into a town tradition. It began with just 4 regulars, her uncle, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant with a gravelly laugh, Clara, a Desert Storm medic who sketched in a worn notebook, Hank, a Vietnam vet who spoke more with his eyes than his voice, and Maria, a former Army nurse whose stories lit up the room. Over time, the circle expanded. Veterans from Iraq, Afghanistan, even World War II stragglers found their way to Willow Brew. They came not for the menu but for Ellie's gift, a space to be seen, not fixed. She'd greet them with her mantra, "This is a place to sit, to breathe, not to perform." Shoulders would ease, coffee would flow, and stories, funny, heavy, or unspoken, filled the air. The mayor once said Ellie held Cedar Grove together better than City Hall. Veterans called her "ma'am" with reverence. Teens held the door without prompting. But Ellie didn't chase glory. Her work was love, poured one cup at a time. What was about to threaten that fragile peace? That Tuesday dawned crisp, the kind of morning where sunlight felt sharp and steam curled from mugs like tiny spirits. The Willow Brew hummed with its usual rhythm, the bell jingled softly, coffee pots gurgled, and regulars settled into their booths. Ellie moved with quiet efficiency, her blue flannel sleeves rolled up, her voice a steady anchor. She refilled Clara's decaf, nodded at Hank's silent request for a second slice of pie, and slipped a handwritten note onto the chalkboard, "Veterans Haven today, free coffee, always." Then the door opened, and Amos Carter stepped in, a grizzled ex-Marine in his late 50s, his face etched with lines from a life of service. By his side was Scout, a German shepherd in a red service vest, his eyes sharp and loyal. Amos was new to Cedar Grove, a man of few words, his hands scarred from battles he didn't name. Ellie waved him to a corner booth. "Coffee's hot, Amos. Settle in." He nodded, Scout curling under the table, his vest bold, service dog. Do not pet. The room felt right, whole, until it splintered. Who was about to walk through that door? The door swung open with a sharp whoosh, and a man in a pressed gray suit stormed in, his polished shoes clicking like a metronome. His name tag read, Victor Crane, Health Inspector, and his face was carved from stone, devoid of warmth. A clipboard hung from his hand like a badge of power. The air tightened. Conversations faded to whispers. Ellie stepped forward, her tone polite but firm. Can I get you anything, sir? Crane didn't look up, his pen already scratching. Unannounced inspection, he snapped, moving through the cafe with surgical precision. He tapped counters, checked expiration dates on creamers, opened fridge doors with a scowl. Then his eyes locked on Scout, sprawled calmly beneath Amos's table. His pen froze mid-stroke. That animal, he said, his voice slicing through the hush, is a direct violation of state health code. No pets allowed where food is served. Remove it, or this establishment is shut down. Amos's scarred hands tightened around his mug, his jaw set. The room held its breath. Would Ellie bend under the pressure? Her heart pounded like a drum, but her face stayed steady as granite. She stepped out from behind the counter, her sneakers soft on the linoleum, and faced Crane. Scout's a registered service dog, she said, her voice low but unyielding. Federal law under the ADA protects his right to be here with a veteran. He's not a pet, he's a lifeline. Crane's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. Law or not, dogs mean filth, dander, saliva, bacteria. I don't care what vest it's wearing. Get it out, or I'll have this place boarded up by noon. Amos shifted in his seat, his hand brushing Scout's head, ready to stand. Ellie raised a hand, gentle but sure, signaling him to stay. I won't ask a veteran to leave his dog outside, she said, her voice rising just enough to carry. Not in this cafe. Not ever. Write your report, but you're targeting a man who risked his life for this country, in front of the people he fought for. A murmur rippled through the room. Clara whispered, damn straight, and Hank nodded silently. But then the door opened again, and a new shadow fell across the floor. Who had heard her defiance? Claire Morgan, regional manager for Willow Brew's corporate parent, stood in the doorway, her tailored blazer as sharp as her gaze. She'd come for a routine check but walked into a showdown. Her heels clicked like gunfire as she crossed the cafe, her voice cold as a winter wind. Ellie Harper, she said, each syllable a blade, you just defied a state inspector in front of witnesses. You violated company policy and health regulations. Pack your things, you're terminated, effective immediately. Gasps echoed like a chorus. A spoon clattered to the floor. Amos stood halfway, his eyes wide with shock. Ellie didn't flinch. She looked at Amos, at Scout, at the chalkboard with its promise of free coffee for vets. Then she smiled, faint but real, and untied her apron. Her hands, steady now, folded it neatly and laid it on the counter. To Mia, the young barista hovering by the espresso machine, she whispered, keep Amos's coffee full. Don't let him pay. She turned, walked through the side door into the blinding morning sunlight, and left the cafe frozen behind her. But someone was watching. Someone pressed record on their phone. What would that video unleash into the world? For 30 long minutes, the Willow Brew was a ghost town. Customers whispered in hushed tones, some left their mugs half-drunk, others stared out the windows as if the answers might roll in with the morning mist. Mia, barely 20, stood behind the counter, her hands trembling as she poured coffee, determined to hold Ellie's ground. Amos sat motionless, Scout's head resting on his knee, both statue still, as if the room itself had broken. Clara sketched furiously in her notebook, her pencil scratching like a heartbeat. Hank's eyes darted to the door, waiting. Then a low rumble stirred the air, faint at first, like distant thunder rolling over Georgia's red clay hills. Glasses rattled on tables. Coffee rippled in mugs. The cafe's windows hummed with vibration. Customers stood, craning their necks. From the east end of Main Street, through the haze of maple-lined sidewalks, came 4 military Humvees, their tires growling against the pavement, their lights cutting through the mist like blades. They pulled into the lot in a slow, deliberate line, blocking the cafe's entrance. Doors slammed in unison. A Marine colonel in dress blues stepped out, his medals glinting like stars, his face carved from resolve. Behind him, 20 Marines fanned out, their boots hitting the ground with the precision of a drumroll. Who was this man, and what was he here to do? Colonel Marcus Vaughn entered the Willow Brew alone, his presence filling the room like a storm. The bell above the door rang once, sharp, like a salute. His dress blues were immaculate, gold buttons polished to a mirror shine, white gloves tucked under one arm, ribbons and medals telling a story of sacrifice. He scanned the cafe, his gaze locking on Amos, who stood slowly, his scarred hands steady now. Their eyes met in a silent exchange, 2 soldiers bound by an unspoken code. Vaughn turned to Mia, her hands still trembling behind the counter. "Where's Ellie Harper?" he asked, his voice low but commanding, each word weighted with purpose. Mia swallowed hard. "She was fired, sir. For standing up for him." She nodded at Amos, whose jaw tightened. Vaughn's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a near growl. "This woman gave my Marines a place to breathe when the world turned its back. She honored a veteran when you tried to shame him. And you threw her out." He faced Crane, who clutched his clipboard like a shield. I didn't know he was," Crane stammered, his voice cracking. Vaughn cut him off. "You didn't care. What was he about to unleash?" Vaughn stepped outside, his boots echoing on the linoleum, and raised a hand. The Marines moved like a single organism, swift, silent, precise. 2 strode to the counter, peeling the corporate logo from the wall with the reverence of folding a retired flag. Another carried a new sign, hand-painted in bold white letters, "Ellie's Haven, where heroes are honored." They replaced the chalkboard with it, the words gleaming like a promise. Claire Morgan, the regional manager, opened her mouth to protest, her face pale as ash, but Vaughn's glance stopped her cold. "You made your choice," he said, his voice a blade. "Now we make ours." Mia's phone buzzed, shattering the silence. She glanced down, confused. "It's from Fort Ramsey," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They want Ellie Harper at base headquarters. Now." Amos exhaled, long and slow, Scout's tail thumping softly against the floor. The cafe wasn't just a diner anymore, it was a battleground, and the fight was far from over. What waited for Ellie at Fort Ramsey? Ellie sat in her weathered pickup truck, parked at the edge of her gravel driveway, the engine off. Her coffee-stained jeans and faded blue flannel clung to her like armor, her sneakers scuffed from years of spilled espresso. Fired. For doing what was right. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and bitter. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her, a message from Fort Ramsey, "Report to headquarters immediately. Colonel Marcus Vaughn." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't know what it meant, didn't know if it was good or bad, but something stirred deep in her chest, a spark, a shift, like the first note of a song she hadn't heard in years. She turned the key, the engine rumbling to life, and drove toward the base, its iron gates looming like the entrance to a new world. She'd driven this road 100 times to deliver muffins or coffee canisters, but this time was different. This time, she was crossing a threshold. What was waiting on the other side? Fort Ramsey rose like a fortress, its orderly roads lined with flags, the distant sound of cadence calls echoing through the pines. Ellie had been here before, as a Marine sister, but today she felt like an outsider, her heart pounding as she parked near the main administration building. Colonel Vaughn met her at the entrance, no longer in dress blues but in crisp khakis, his handshake firm and his eyes steady. "Ellie," he said, his voice warm but commanding, "you're not here for coffee." He led her down a hallway lined with portraits of stern commanders, maps of long-fought battles, and polished plaques gleaming with commendations. They stopped at a door marked, Veterans Resilience Hub. Inside, the room was raw, folding chairs stacked against walls, whiteboards scribbled with plans, boxes of donated supplies half unpacked. A few young staffers moved quietly, setting up therapy mats and stacking pamphlets. "This is a pilot program," Vaughn explained, his voice steady but urgent. "We've been trying to launch it for 3 years. It's meant to help veterans transition, heal, reconnect. But it's stuck. We need someone who understands them, not from paperwork, but from life." Was this her chance to rebuild what she'd lost? Ellie folded her arms, her brow furrowing. "I'm no therapist, Colonel. I don't have a degree. I just pour coffee." Vaughn's eyes softened, a rare smile breaking through. "You built a refuge with nothing but kindness, Ellie. You did more for my Marines with a mug and a nod than most programs do with $1 million budget." Before she could respond, a voice called from the back of the room. "Is that her?" A young woman stepped forward, mid-20s, her long sleeves hiding scars that peeked out at her wrists. A golden retriever puppy, its red vest marked, "In Training," padded beside her. "I'm Lena," she said, her voice shy but steady. "I saw the video of you standing up for that vet and his dog. I haven't felt safe in a diner since I came back from deployment. But I'd sit in a place you run." Ellie's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. Vaughn stepped closer, his tone softer now. "We need you to run this hub, Ellie. Not as a figurehead, but as its heart. Build it your way. Community, respect, no judgment." She looked at Lena, kneeling with her pup, then at the bare room, brimming with possibility. Her voice was quiet but sure. "I'm in." Could she turn this empty space into a home? Weeks later, the Veterans Resilience Hub wasn't just a room, it was a living, breathing haven. Veterans filled it daily, some trading stories over coffee, others sitting in silence, all finding solace. Ellie kept her old notebook, its pages now thick with new names and quirks. Lena prefers chamomile tea, avoids loud groups. Amos skips June 3rd, no questions. Clara sketches dogs to cope. Service dogs lounged in corners, their vests bright against the scuffed floors, no questions asked. Ellie set up a whiteboard by the coffee pot. Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? The Cedar Grove Gazette ran a front-page spread, "From Cafe to Cornerstone, Ellie Harper's Mission of Mercy." Veterans who hadn't set foot on base in decades showed up, drawn by whispers of a place that felt like home. Young soldiers brought hesitant spouses, and locals donated chairs, books, even a second-hand piano for quiet evenings. But not everyone was convinced. Could Ellie's unorthodox approach withstand scrutiny? Auditors arrived from D.C., their suits stiff and their clipboards sterner. They questioned her lack of credentials, poking through logs, testing water filters, eyeing the dogs with suspicion. One inspector, a man with a voice like gravel, stared her down. "What certifications qualify you to counsel veterans?" Ellie didn't blink. "I don't have certifications," she said softly. "Just consistency and kindness." The room fell silent. The inspector scribbled, his face unreadable. A week later, a notice arrived. The hub was under review for national expansion, a potential model for bases across the country. Colonel Vaughn called it a triumph. Ellie called it humbling. But the willow brew still tugged at her heart. What had become of the place she'd poured her soul into? One quiet afternoon, Ellie slipped back into the cafe, unannounced. Mia, now running the counter with a new confidence, grinned and slid her a mug. "Thought you were a big shot now, Ellie." She laughed, her voice warm. "Just here for the coffee." The cafe had transformed, walls lined with photos of veterans, Amos and Lena among them, and a new sign by the register, Ellie's Corner, no one sits alone. Clara's sketches hung framed near the door, Hank's favorite pie was now Hank's Special on the menu, and Maria's laugh echoed from a booth where she told stories to new faces. Ellie's heart swelled. The cafe hadn't died, it had grown. That evening, she spoke at a local fundraiser for veteran families, a modest event with folding chairs and kids waving crayon-drawn posters. She stood without notes, her voice steady. "I didn't set out to change the world. I just refused to turn away a man and his dog. Sometimes, that's enough." The crowd fell silent, then erupted in applause, long and real. In the back, Amos stood, his silver star pinned to his chest, and offered a quiet salute. What new honor awaited her? A letter arrived 3 weeks later, sealed with the gold emblem of the Department of Defense. Colonel Vaughn handed it to her in her small office at the hub, surrounded by the hum of a space learning to heal. "You'll want to sit for this," he said, a rare grin breaking through. Ellie opened it, her hands trembling as she read the first line, "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." She read it again, then once more, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do anything special." Vaughn chuckled. "That's exactly why you're getting it." The letter invited her to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference in Washington, D.C. Her knees buckled. "I'm no public speaker," she protested. Vaughn's eyes twinkled. "You are now." As she packed for D.C., just a blazer, her brother's old watch, and her worn notebook filled with names like "Tiffany Prefers Tea" and "Don't Ask Amos About June 3rd, a voice called her at the airport. "Need a ride, Miss Harper?" Amos stood tall in dress blues, Scout calm by his side, tail wagging. "The base sent me as your escort," he said with a grin. Ellie laughed, half nerves, half awe. "You clean up nice." He smirked. "You're the one about to face the Pentagon." Could she rise to the moment? The D.C. conference hall was a world away from Cedar Grove, white tablecloths, polished brass podiums, cameras at every angle. Ellie's name glowed on a screen in elegant script. Her heart raced as she stepped to the microphone, her voice small but growing stronger. "I'm not a general. I'm not a doctor. I didn't write policy. I ran a cafe near a Marine base. I poured coffee. I listened. But in that space, I saw something sacred. Veterans didn't need fixing, they needed seeing." The room leaned in, some nodding, others wiping tears. "One day, I got fired for letting a man sit with his service dog. That changed everything." But the truth? It was never about coffee. It was about dignity. Applause thundered, shaking the hall. Amos stood in the back, not clapping, just nodding, like a soldier hearing his orders clearly at last. Later, as the sun dipped behind the Potomac, an older man approached Ellie outside, his gray suit modest, his white beard framing kind eyes. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked. He pulled out a grainy photo, her brother, David, and the man in uniform, standing outside Willow Brew years ago. "You poured me coffee the day I got my medical discharge," he said. "You didn't say a word, just smiled. It was the first time I felt human again." He pressed the photo into her hands. "It's yours now." Ellie's tears fell, words caught in her throat. Back in Cedar Grove, the town threw a welcome home celebration, but Ellie went straight to the hub. It was late, quiet, a few veterans lingering by a fire pit outside. She walked to the wall of photos, Amos, Lena, Clara, and now a new one, the DC crowd giving her a standing ovation. Beside it, she pinned the old photo of her brother and the soldier, taping a note below, "Kindness builds what medals can't." As she turned to leave, a young veteran, barely 22, stepped through the door, his eyes nervous. "Is this, for people like me?" Ellie smiled, her voice soft but sure. "No, son. It's for all of us." Her circle wasn't just full, it was open, endless. Ellie Harper didn't wear a uniform or chase medals, but she defended something deeper, dignity. Her story, born in a small-town cafe, reminds us that courage isn't always a shout, it's the quiet stand, the unseen act, the refusal to look away. How many Ellies have you walked past without noticing? How many times have you stayed silent when you could have acted? This isn't just her story, it's a call to action. Share your moment of courage in the comments below. Your story could spark the next fire. If this moved you, hit like, subscribe to HeroHush Stories, and share it with someone who believes in quiet heroes. The next tale. It's even bigger. Stay with us.